me. I'm Scott Galit. I'm the CEO of Payoneer. I'm happy to be here this morning. I'm here to talk to you about the globalization of digital media and some really powerful trends that we're seeing towards continued globalization, as well as some interesting tools that you can use to either globalize your business or better manage a global business that you're already running. So for starters, let's talk about, at a very basic level, being global. And really the first key question is, can you afford not to be global in the current environment? Online advertising is already bigger outside the United States than it is in the United States. Advertising overall is also growing faster outside the United States than it is inside the United States. I've already seen a tremendous number of leading digital media and affiliate companies that have been expanding aggressively internationally. But one thing that's very clear is it is extremely complicated to deal with everything you need to in order to actually manage a global digital media business. There are a lot of very not very digital things that you have to deal with, whether it be very unsexy things like tax compliance and OFAC obligations, customer service, lost payments, things along those lines that are very, very cumbersome and problematic and very administrative heavy challenges for most companies. And so a concept that we're going to introduce today and talk a little bit more about is payments as a service, and how payments as a service can enable companies to globalize with much less headache, much less hassle, and actually go bigger, faster globally. So starting with online advertising and the globalization trends that we see, here's an interesting chart. Shows already that about 60% of online ad spending occurs outside the United States. So the rest of the world is already 50% larger in ad spend online than North America is. So again, these stats really surprised me. We've known about the globalization trends for a while, but actually seeing some of these specific numbers was a bit of a surprise. I'm really not aware, and maybe you all are more expert than I am. We see the best tools and the best companies in the industry coming out of the United States. We see the ability for US-based companies to deploy those tools and techniques outside the United States, and we see obviously tremendous opportunity outside the US, where US companies have an opportunity to extend their leadership position. This is advertising overall, just pointing to some more broad macro trends that we're seeing globally. So already by 2013, about a third of global ad spend is coming from developing markets. Not surprising to all of us, overall ad spend, not just digital, but overall ad spend in North America is growing in the low single digits, tracking pretty closely to the economy overall, but also probably not all that surprising when you look into the rest of the world. There are strong indications that the rest of the world is growing much faster than the developed economies of the US, and if we stuck Western Europe on this, it would be growing even more slowly. This is a great chart. I'm not sure if you all would be familiar with Meeker. She was a leading internet analyst on Wall Street for a long time, and she's now at Kleiner Perkins. She does an annual internet report. If you haven't seen it, really strongly recommend. You can just find it online. And so, bottom line is that this is not your parents' internet anymore, right? So I was in Pakistan not that long ago. We've got relationships all over the world. Everybody in Pakistan that I met was on Facebook, on LinkedIn, active users of the internet, and what you see is masses of people and masses of businesses all over the world that never had an opportunity to transact globally that now do. It is absolutely a sea change in how the world operates, and this is really just the tip of the iceberg. And again, kind of bottom lining it, you look at this chart as of 2012, US 244 million internet users, globally 2.4 billion internet users, and that's going in one direction. US will continue to shrink as a percentage of global activity. So how big is it? Again, there are lots of different ways that we can try to come at the size of these opportunities. So kind of one last stat to try to tie it together. 76 billion of new global ad spend by 2015, about 55 billion of that outside the United States. So again, tremendous shift in where and how advertising money is getting spent all over the world. As we all know, obviously, digital becoming an increasing portion of that. So what's been happening in the digital media space, kind of getting a little bit closer to home here. Huge investments, international expansion by industry leaders over the last several years. We've also seen a tremendous increased investment by US-based companies, marketers and merchants in marketing their business internationally as well. And so what they've been doing is asking their online advertising partners and infrastructure providers to grow with them and to give them the same tools and infrastructure that they need in order to expand globally. This is not just a US phenomenon. There's also all kinds of corridors developing. Another example would be in Europe, where there's a whole new corridor developing between Europe and Latin America, between Spanish-speaking world, Portuguese-speaking world, and again, other types of trends developing as well. So now talking about, some of the challenges of going global, and going global isn't easy. So again, your technology may translate easily into, delivering ads or delivering customers in other geographies, but there are lots of less glamorous considerations that ultimately really may determine your success. Things like language support, whether you're able to manage fraud and mitigate fraud issues the same way you can in the US. Dealing with money laundering and terrorist financing issues, which are actually very real challenges. Tax compliance, payments, the administrative burden of all kinds of customer service and lost payment issues and things like that. So there are a tremendous number of challenges that go along with the very basics of actually, can you deliver a service? Behind the scenes, there's a lot of back office and other things that come into play. So just zeroing in on a few of these in a little bit more detail, focusing first on tax compliance. Again, not something that's very high on anybody's list of favorite things to deal with. And I'm guessing that most of you really don't know the difference between a W-8 and a W-9 or what either one of them is. Again, not something that I've spent a lot of my time on in my career. But this is an area that's more complicated than ever and getting more focus and attention than ever. So, it's a long quote, but bottom line says if you get the right documentation for your international payees, you should be covered, and if you don't, you might have problems. And so, the obligations for US companies are getting more and more stringent. There's something called FATCA, the first of a few acronyms that we're going to talk about. FATCA is basically a new law that's getting implemented in 2014 by the US government as an effort to catch tax evaders who are US citizens. So they have basically imposed a whole new set of data collection and filing requirements on anybody that touches payments going around the world, specifically so the US government can collect some additional tax revenue. So again, the importance of being able to collect and manage the right tax forms. If you are a US business or a business related and has any operations in the US, those obligations and costs are going up. Let's continue with fun with acronyms and go to OFAC. Again, something that I'm suspecting most of you don't spend much time thinking about, but this is something that's actually really serious, and it's actually something that's an obligation for every US company, every US citizen. Doesn't matter whether you are involved in payments, not involved in payments, and it's something the US government takes very seriously. At a very basic level, it's designed by the US government to ensure no one in the US is doing business with really bad people. So this includes countries like Iran that are basically blocked entirely from US companies engaging in business, to terrorists that are on lists, drug traffickers that are on lists, And so these lists are updated regularly, and this is an obligation of any company in the United States and every individual in the United States. So in terms of compliance, everybody needs to comply. The penalties can be severe. Again, it's something that the government takes very seriously. And so again, kind of a basic question, how does your company comply? Most of the companies that we talk to, this doesn't really enter their thinking. It's not something they pay attention to. It is an obligation, and it is something that gains increased attention over time. So, we've talked about the opportunity overall and how big it is. We've talked about just a few of the challenges. And so what if there was an opportunity to accelerate your growth globally, to remove a lot of the administrative burdens that come along with that, without having to worry about a whole host of the challenges that we already touched on? So what if you could do that without having to worry about managing tax compliance, dealing with OFAC and anti-money laundering and terrorist financing considerations, having to figure out how to deal with fraud issues by plugging into some fraud management tools, having teams that are working for you to track lost payments and dealing with the frontline support issues in different languages and different currencies. And so ultimately, there are a whole host of things that are truly burdensome challenges for companies that are doing global business. And ultimately, there's a new category of service provider out there providing a service called payments as a service that wraps all these types of things together. So not surprisingly, payments as a service is really a complete solution meant to handle all the payments and all the things that are wrapping around payments as administrative burdens to help companies solve for their payment problems, their payee management and administration problems, as well as key compliance obligations. And so key criteria as you think about how to select a provider, tax compliance solutions. There are opportunities to even get an IRS guarantee, a letter from the IRS saying that you are, in fact, compliant with your tax obligations. OFAC and AML screening, fraud tools, languages, currencies, and including having a regulated provider there to be able to stand up and demonstrate compliance. So let's take a quick look at a couple of specific examples of companies that have plugged into payments as a service and used it to help their businesses grow faster internationally. Taboola is one example. You've likely seen Taboola. Taboola is on a lot of websites. You look on the bottom and you'll see a section called You Might Also Like, with links out to either websites or video. Taboola is a fast-growing leader in that category. They have a lot of activity all over the world. 2.5 billion daily recommendations, 250 million unique users monthly through their network. But they had some very significant challenges as they were growing their business. They had a huge effort as they tried to collect and manage tax forms. So every time business changed information on a periodic basis, they needed to gather that. That's on top of having to have figured out what was the right form in the first place, how do they store it, how do they track it, how do they deal with the tax filings around it. They also were making a lot of payments into different countries, so how could they make sure that a payment was only going to go if they already had a tax form on file, as opposed to going when they actually hadn't fulfilled the proper tax obligations. It's expensive and difficult to manage the bank relationship and interface as well. Lots of lost payments, lots of research, lots of administrative headaches. Taboola plugged into a payments as a service offering, provided a complete tax form management solution. They got out of the tax form collection business. It's something that they now just have access to the data on an on-demand basis that they need whenever they do need it, and they have the confidence that it's actually been collected for them. They've actually been able to expand the suite of payment tools available, so they're now able to make payments through more payment methods in more countries at a lower cost around the world. So this is a company that now has an automated API into an electronic payment infrastructure that's also managing their tax compliance for them, and they're moving millions of dollars around the world every month in different currencies to different countries. Clickbank, another well-known company. They saw payments as a key part of enabling their growth. Here's a little, obviously very brief excerpt from a press release from December 2012 that they were partnering with a payment provider to simplify their expansion into Latin America. And so they saw a tremendous opportunity in Latin America, and they understood that payments was a source of friction, that if they couldn't solve the payment problem, they weren't going to be able to expand and maximize their growth in that market. So they have over 100,000 active affiliate marketers, and by partnering and expanding the scope of payment capabilities that they were able to plug into, their expectation that they quoted was that they'd be able to serve up to 5,000 more affiliates in Latin America. So a meaningful lift in their expectations in the business that they were going to be able to do in an important growth market for them. As we go back to what we talked about earlier, a market that's growing much faster at this point than the US market is. And so, again, tying in with their core business, giving them the ability to reach further into emerging markets, do so more confidently, and plugging in with a single integration or a single connection into a service that offers a wide variety of payment tools for them to offer to their customers and affiliates. In terms of market feedback, again, just an example of quote, from a company sending lots of payments to recipients in lots of geographies. There are hundreds of companies that are like this, that are using payments as a service to enable their growth, that are very focused on doing business globally, that have really collection and operations really based in one place, but they're expanding their business and their customer base or the group that they're interacting with on a global basis. So we obviously love it when people describe a service like that as brilliant, and they weren't even British. So again, something very gratifying to see someone talk about the category that way. Getting a little bit more granular and just kind of highlighting some of the kinds of things that you start to see available with a service provider, and again, not going into too much detail, but there are lots of additional benefits. There's a whole host of fraud tools. One of the cool things that you'll see in these types of industries is there's very much a network effect. So affiliates and other companies or participants that work with one company will likely work with other companies. If they're bad with one company, they're likely bad with other companies. So finding those bad actors is something that when you start to create a network of companies that are making payments or collecting tax forms or things like that through a single provider, you start to benefit by being kind of the next node in that network, and the network gets more powerful with every node that gets added. And so there's a whole variety of tools that can be made available, like pulling payments back, understanding where and how payments were used, tracking IP addresses, looking at all kinds of mismatches, having negative lists from other companies that have put a block on somebody before. There's a whole host of different things that become possible with some of the service providers that are out there. Don't expect you to go deep on this. I can obviously answer questions, but compliance it's a very, very real challenge, and it's something that takes a tremendous amount of investment. This stems all the way from anti-money laundering policies, through monitoring tools, through know your customer work, through back-end transaction monitoring activity, through suspicious activity reporting to government authorities and OFAC checking and all kinds of things. There's a whole variety of different gates that are created and available. And so bottom line here, there's a tremendous amount of money that gets invested in compliance infrastructure that helps companies meet their obligations as well as minimize their risk. When you start to get into some of the messaging and how are you communicating about payments, things along those lines, again, just a couple of examples. Languages are obviously key. So if you have payments that are going to people in different countries and different currencies that speak different languages, again, many of the folks interact at least to some level in English, but having the ability to communicate in local language and actually get those messages out there is something that's very important. And so again, strong language support top to bottom through online infrastructure, messaging infrastructure, customer service infrastructure is something that's very valuable. Payment notifications. So again, your bank isn't providing notification services to recipients of payments that you're sending out. giving information about the timing of the payments, what was sent, what's going to be received in local currency, as well as access to a place where they can go and get questions, track previous payments, things along those lines, are all important. And obviously, we all know mobile matters. So those are just highlights and examples of a few of the types of, again, kind of more detailed services and support capabilities that are available. So kind of summing it back up, I'll ask the same question that I did to start. Can you afford not to be global? We think it's very clear that digital media is already bigger outside the US and growing faster, that it is very complicated to deal with a lot of the regulatory compliance and administrative burdens of becoming a global business and managing that on an ongoing basis, and that payments as a service can really help companies either accelerate their growth or better manage their growth by providing a complete solution that ensures compliance, provides a very broad range of payment options available that are lower cost typically than what you can find elsewhere, and really dramatically reduces headaches and hassle associated with managing all of this international activity, all these international payees and those international payments. So that was it. So any questions? Anything I can go into in more detail? Anybody running? Yeah, please.
If you already have an account with a network like Commission Junction or SlideShare, ShareSale, this is not an option. I mean, you don't need this, right? The services they handle, the payments of affiliates and all of that.
Well, so it depends on the network, and it depends how they actually are managing the tax information, making the payments and things like that. So one of those two companies that you talked about actually does have a connection into a service along these lines. They use it for certain things and not others. But ultimately, if you're receiving payments, then it depends on what company you're working with or what companies you're working with. But yeah, many of them actually do use payments as a service, and there are dozens of affiliate marketing and digital media companies that use it. There are infrastructure companies like Has Offers and Direct Track and other infrastructure providers that have plugged in some services along these lines into their infrastructure to make it available to companies that they're working with and the people that they're paying. So yes, companies like that would be candidates for using a service like this. Ultimately, you have your own tax reporting obligations. They have their tax management obligations on their side. So you should mention it to them, and obviously you should deal with your accountant on whatever your own specific income and things are like that. But it's really for you you can communicate to them, and they'll determine the best approach to take. Thanks. Anybody doing business globally today? So, is it a meaningful percentage of your business?
It's at least 25%.
At least 25%. And is that bigger or smaller than it was a year ago?
I didn't bring metrics. I can't tell you. It varies. Some years are better than others.
Huh.
Still, we do the majority of our work in the U.S. I do have a question about that. A lot of the regulations you spoke of are U.S.-centric. Are you on top of the rules non-U.S. countries?
We specifically for us, yes, but Canada, I'd say we have some expertise in Canada. Europe, we actually have quite a bit of expertise in Europe. And again, by expertise, I don't want to overstate things. So this is not going to be, if there are rules around what you can and can't say, or how you can or can't market, or what you do or don't have to do with privacy, we may be able to offer some insight, but we're not going to be experts at that. But if you...
I'm speaking more towards like the money laundering law.
Yeah, Yeah. So yeah, we absolutely, we deal with, you know, there's international standards, there's regulatory foundations in multiple geographies, and that is, it's very complicated and getting more so, not less so. Yeah. Anything else? All right, well, thank you very much. I know it's late in the conference, so thanks for coming. Appreciate it.